LegalizeFreedom.com. Why are we here? Where do we come from? Where are we going? From the nature of reality to the future of humanity. Beyond politics, poverty, and war. LegalizeFreedom.com.
Greetings and welcome once again to LegalizeFreedom.com. I'm your host Greg Moffat, and my guest today is Gregg Levoy, who joins us to discuss his book Vital Signs, The Nature and Nurture of Passion. This exuberant and compelling work explores how you can cultivate not just a specific passion, but passion as a mindset, a stance that helps bring vitality to all your engagements, from work and relationships to creativity and spiritual life. Vital Signs examines the endless, yet endlessly fruitful tug-of-war between passion and security in our lives, the wild in us and the tame, our natural selves and our conditioned selves, and shows how to stay engaged with the world and resist the downward pulling forces that can drain our aliveness. Vital Signs also encourages courageous inquiry into our dispassion, where we're numb, depressed, stuck, and bored in our lives, so that we can rework these tendencies in ourselves, claim our rightful inheritance of vitality, and get our spark back. Drawing from centuries of history, art, science, psychology, and philosophy, as well as in-depth interviews with people who have rediscovered and reignited passion in their own lives, Vital Signs offers an expansive menu of possibilities for how to claim and reclaim your passion, and will help you maintain a keen awareness of where the pulse is and a determination to plug into that place. Hello and welcome, Greg, and thank you so much for joining us today on LegalizeFreedom.com.
Thanks, my pleasure.
Greg, today we're going to be talking about your book, Vital Signs, The Nature and Nurture of Passion. Before we dive into that, tell listeners a bit about your personal background and your work in general.
Yes. Well, my background is journalism. I was a reporter for the first 15 years of my life, USA Today and the Cincinnati Enquirer, and became a freelance writer for 20 years. And I've just simply had a lifelong fascination with the question of how people create a life that really belongs to them and isn't a knockoff. And so that kind of explains both of my books, the Callings book and the Vital Signs book. It's just been one of my lifelong curiosities.
Well, yeah, my next question was going to be where did the book come from? As you say, obviously you've published two, but I think I can still ask that question, but perhaps you can relate it to maybe your personal life in terms of where this came from. These questions you were asking, you're observing the people around you, the other people in your life, perhaps even strangers. To what extent did this come from within you, really, in issues that you were addressing personally?
Yeah, I would say that if I were to trace it all the way back, it probably comes from having grown up in a family where neither of my parents did what they really wanted to do with their lives in terms of their vocational life. And so I got a chance to watch how that unfolds in people's lives and how it unfolds in a family and how it affected me and the choices that I've made. And I remember Carl Jung once talking about the importance of the unlived life of a parent on a child. And so I look at the question of what did my parents each want to do that they didn't do? And I've just sort of processed that for years and years. And I think that's, in a sense, one of the origins of the book, is just looking at what happens when we suppress our natural desires, our natural inclinations and instincts and exuberances and energies. I think also, to be perfectly honest, I spent most of my childhood on Ritalin. And so I didn't find this out until I was in my early 30s, that my mother had literally slipped it into my morning milk. And as you might imagine, that was a hard piece of information to swallow. And but it explains both of my books, because they're both about taking the cork off the bottle that the genie is in and letting your natural exuberances out. And so I've got a bit of a professional chip on my shoulder about having my natural energies suppressed from the outside. And that's one of the themes that runs through both of my works.
Now, just as a brief point to make for people who don't know, I'm not sure if Ritalin is still commonly in use or not, but we're talking, as far as I know here, about a form of a suppressant sort of drug, a bit like those that are all too common today that are used to medicate kids who are deemed to be hyperactive.
Right, precisely. Yes, I believe Ritalin is still in widespread use. I was one of, I suppose, the pioneers back in the late 50s, early 60s. I guess it was in a lot of use back then. But yeah, it's essentially for kids who have what's now called ADD or ADHD. Mm-hmm. And really, I think it was Mother's little helper. She was just giving it to us instead of taking it herself. Yeah,
of course. I mean, I think this would be tantamount to child abuse these days, to administer it to a child without them knowing.
Right.
But, okay, well, to pick up on the central thrust of what you said in your introduction, this idea, and this will resonate with a lot of people, because if it resonates or has resonated with me at various times in my life and resonates with everyone I have ever met, come to know well enough to have a conversation about what they do with their lives, this idea of not living an authentic life, not literally not doing what you want to do, is rampant. Now, yeah. I haven't lived in every type of society in the world, so you and I are mainly talking about the type of society that we're familiar with, the Western industrial society. That's what we've grown up with. That's what we know. That's what we see around us. But of course, this will occur in other societies as well. And crucially, it has a particular relevance in societies that are advanced enough to have moved beyond, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Right.
We've got to the stage where self-actualization is within our grasp if we choose it. But we have created a world, a society really that deadens a lot of the passion within us. I think you make a point, I'm paraphrasing here, in the book about not noticing the stars and not noticing the sunset and not having this sense of wonder that's actually inherent within us. Mm. And the advance of industrial society was really about these basic needs increasingly would be met. This model would spread around the world, and this possibility for people to live transcendent lives, self-actualized lives, was only going to increase. But we've taken a wrong turn somewhere, and actually we're now increasingly not living authentic lives. I think that's a fair summary.
Absolutely. Yeah, well put. I would, however, contend with the assumption that it's only in industrialized countries where this is an issue, because I think I mentioned this in the book. There was this Gallup survey that was done just 3 years ago, 2012. And it was an international survey. They did 142 countries, and they found that on average, 87% of workers are either, as they put it, not engaged or actively disengaged, and only 13% were engaged. And so, I mean, what this means is not engaged means you're checked out. And actively disengaged means that you're busy acting out your unhappiness and your dispiritedness and kind of spreading the virus all over the place among colleagues or friends or children or whatever communities you belong to. So apparently this is more widespread than just Western or industrialized, quote, developed countries.
Well, I guess what I would say that I've observed in my lifetime is that societies that were perhaps once, to some extent, third world, that are moving into second world, that want to become like, Western Europe and North America, right. China and India, for example, maybe Brazil is an example as well, that they're moving into the sort of malady and the symptoms that you've just described without ever going through some of the phases that we, perhaps our parents had the opportunity to enjoy in the immediate aftermath of World War II. That optimism that was there. So, yeah, I mean, actually, despite what I said, it makes perfect sense when I hear stories of, the lives that a lot of Chinese and Indian and other, workers in other similar countries that they have, because of the work they're doing, is a lot of the work that we exported that some of our people used to do. And it was, unrewarding and, all too often meaningless, actually. It's one thing to be employed in a factory making training shoes. But at least you're making something. People want training shoes, but there's a lot of occupations, a lot of jobs that people are doing that are really paper shuffling, cog turning, and it doesn't serve any useful end whatsoever. So, but still, it's disturbing statistics that you quote there.
Yeah, and here's another cultural piece that I personally have been fascinated with. Is this, and I don't know exactly how globalized this is. But just knowing how American culture or Western culture is exported these days, I suspect it's more widespread than this. But I've been fascinated by the cultural obsession we seem to have with zombies and vampires. So I did a little bit of research, and it turns out that there's been something like 50,000 books written about those two subjects in the last 2 decades alone, and 500 movies and TV shows. And so what is going on there? I suspect it's more than just apocalyptic thinking. I'm sure that's some of it, but I think it's a kind of a collective anxiety that we have about, one, being sucked of our life force, and two, being left in a catatonic state. And I don't think it's a coincidence either that every culture seems to have a word for vampire.
Yeah, I think that the popular interpretation of all those, movies and the other pop culture that you've spoken of is that it's apocalyptic. But I think your take on it is a very interesting wrinkle. That's more internal, personal angle.
Yeah, I think it's some anxiety about the culture that we've created that can be so life draining and so distracting in a literal sense. And by that I mean the word distract means to be pulled apart. There's something that I see all over the place, just all the ways that life can just separate us from our vitality.
Well, I spoke with Joseph Chilton Pearce, who you cite in your book, and I'm paraphrasing, but in the book, The Crack in the Cosmic Egg, I think it was. No, it was the later one. He did a sequel to that. And long story short, he was saying that this acculturization is a major problem because we fit into our culture only by becoming of that culture. And if the culture that you're immersed in is, and this, my word, not yours, insane on whatever level, then the only way you can be part of that is to buy into that insanity. Whatever level you want to look at it. And the culture that we, again, currently seem to, I don't want to use the word celebrate, actually, because there doesn't seem to be any real celebrating about it. It's more like a wake than anything else. But it's a consumerist, materialist culture. Oh. And this is what we use my phrase is to hide from ourselves, to sort of blacken the mirror so we can't see our reflections. And this also manifests itself in addiction, and not just addiction to spending money at the mall on a weekend, to try and distract yourself from your dead-end job, but literal addiction. I think it's a seed of alcoholism and drug addiction and other forms of addictive behavior.
Yeah. That's a great point. I personally would take it one step farther back. Is civilization itself seems to me, and I'm borrowing some of these ideas from our friend Freud, civilization and its discontents. Civilization itself is a counterpoint to nature. And so the civilized parts of us are sort of constantly in a tug-of-war with the natural instinctive parts of us, where I think a lot of our kind of native intelligences, native sense of vitality resides. And so there's this constant tug of war between our socialized conditioned self and our natural, exuberant, alive, beginner's mind kind of self. And one of the best pieces of advice I've ever been given is that I need to learn to cultivate the skill of paradox. In other words, somehow holding the tension. I guess Carl Jung also referred to the tension of opposites. Holding the tension between my natural instinctive self and my cultured self. And there's nothing right or wrong inherently in either one of them, but I just need to hold the tension and kind of referee it. And I think that's a critical piece, the holding, the skill of holding paradox, two seemingly contrary ideas or impulses or energies or beliefs, and kind of hold them inside of me without splitting down the middle or, hurling my cookies, whatever. I think it's a high art.
I think there's a lot in that expression, you sort of know thyself. Because you're right, we adapt ourselves in different situations. We can be chameleon-like in that sense, but there is an authentic way to do that. Not the borderline psychopath who appears to be everything to everybody, in order to go along, to get along, or to manipulate people. But we have these different aspects to our personalities, our psyches. And as you say, when that gets too far out of balance, we can be into real problems, many of which you're writing about. And you make that point that for some people, attaining balance will be doing something completely opposite to what it would be for someone else who maybe at the other end of an extreme spectrum. So it's just about embracing these different aspects. And I think for our purposes, talking about the context of industrialized societies, but even other emerging societies, one thing that we are out of touch with is, for many people anyway, is that wild aspect. We see that in our disconnect from nature, I think.
Oh, boy, absolutely. Yeah, I've got a whole chapter in the book about regaining wildness, and I love this term. I didn't run across it until I finished the book, rewilding. Have you heard about this?
I have actually, yes, in various different books and articles.
Yeah. I remember in doing some research for that chapter, and I just consider wildness one aspect of living passionately. I remember reading a book called Last Child in the Woods. I don't know if you've run across this, a book by Richard Louv. And he talks about something he calls nature deficit disorder, which I love. And I remember him quoting a fourth grader, I think it was a fourth grader, who said, "I like being indoors best because that's where all the electric outlets are." And this is not a good situation. This strikes me as a bit of a problem, if not a challenge, to balance out our tendency to want to stay indoors most of the time, under lighting that's artificial and air that's forced and computers that apparently are irradiating us slowly. And I just have run across dozens of studies that confirm the healing properties of nature. And why nature, I love this expression that Louv says, nature experiences should be taken out of the leisure column and put in the health column, if not outright taken as medical deductions.
Well, they have everything from recovering addicts to the mentally ill, to criminals, some hardline criminals. All sorts of people have benefited from exposure to nature in various forms. Right.
And so it's been sobering to me just to look at how much of my life I spend in an artificial situation, and how important is, once again, this is, I guess, under the heading of paradox, is make sure that I'm balancing it out to some degree by not being indoors all the time, but getting my feet literally on the ground and immersing myself in water that doesn't just emanate from a shower head, and hugging a tree and spending time outdoors. I interviewed this one guy for that chapter named Robert Greenway, who I guess is credited with starting the eco-psychology movement back in the 60s, Sonoma State University. He used to take students out into the wilderness for anywhere from a couple of days to a couple of weeks. And he said that what he discovered was that after 4 days or so, they start to shed all their cultural assumptions and cultural references and start sitting around fireplaces with a small tribe. And he said that culture may be 10 or 15,000 years old, but it's only 4 days deep.
Mm-hmm.
And I just found that very compelling, that relatively close to the surface, we've got wildness in us. We've got a sense of moving with rhythms and seasons that is absolutely primordial. And certainly, you look at the human brain, 90% of it was manufactured in the natural world. And so it's just, we've become acculturated so quickly that we've lost touch with all this. And I think part of passionate life is reconnecting with it.
Well, a couple of thoughts there. Your last couple of points. I mean, if the person you're referring to wants to see a big electricity outlet, go outside in a thunderstorm, or even just go and look up at the sun. That's a lot more electricity than you're ever going to get out of your socket. But this whole relationship with nature has been not only personally damaging to many of us, we of course have come to, over a long period of time, have come to treat nature as not only a garbage bin, but just as a larder that is meant to be endless. So basically that nature is separate from us. Therefore, no matter how we exploit it or despoil it, it kind of doesn't matter. Whereas, of course, we don't have to, as you alluded to a moment ago, we don't have to go very far back in our history to see intimate interconnectedness with all of nature. We're part of a system.
Right. Precisely. I mean, we refer to ourselves as possessed of human nature, which I think is an acknowledgement that we're part of a larger nature, human nature.
Well, this process that we're talking about here of what happens to us, I mean, thinking about the difference between children, teenagers, adults, this is not natural, this acculturation. Well, of course, on one level, it's to be expected. You're surrounded by other human beings. As we grow up, we learn how to behave from, the adults. That's how we learn to speak and act in all sorts of situations. But I like your phrase that you use in the book, adult-orated, to describe the process where a child is just full of this exuberance, what some medical doctors call irrational exuberance, give them some pills. And they see the world in this holistic way, and they have this unadulterated sense of wonder. And then sooner or later, whether it's by the hand of their own parents, or whether it's society at large, or in some cases their peers, this gradually gets, for want of a better word, ground out of them until they become adulterated and are ready to fit in. Not in every case, of course, we all know our mavericks, but ready to fit into the culture of the society at large.
Absolutely. Yeah, in fact, I think possibly the primary drama for most people, myself included, in terms of trying to stay close to an authentic life, is the struggle between passion and security. Because I think a lot of what the enculturation is about is being secure, safe, secure, and in control. And this is, I guess, another one of those paradoxical equations, is how do you balance out the urge for passion and vitality, life force, to let it have entry into your life, with the desire for safety and security. And I think those both need to be balanced. But unfortunately, at least in my observation, when it comes to the contest between the two of them, security has a tendency to win, by and large, in people's lives, and passion has a tendency to get sidelined or backburnered. But I just think that if you're not expressing it, then you're either suppressing it or repressing it or depressing it, which all mean the same thing, pushing it down. And I know that I can't do that with impunity for too long. I remember running across a Mexican poet named Jose Frias who just captured this so beautifully. He said, "I tried to drown my sorrows with drink, but the damn things learned how to swim." You know, and that to me says so much, because I think that the human soul or psyche or spirit, if you will, is a lot like the earth in the sense that it's a closed system, in the sense that there's no out, as in throwing the garbage out. There's no away, as in running away. Even if you literally turned in the opposite direction from where you felt, as it were, called to be, and ran in the opposite direction, the earth itself would eventually bring you back to where you started, just because it's a circle. You know, so there's no getting away from it. Certainly not with impunity. So I'm of the school of thought of turning and facing. It's like the Buddhists say, take tea with the demons. You know, turn and face the things that want your attention, that are clamoring for your attention, that are sending you wake-up calls to get your attention. And just turn and face them, and see what kind of a message they're bearing.
It's like the dream that you had, that you recount in the book about the black dragon. And I can speak from experience, again, my own and other people that I know well. These things will not go away. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. The slightest, a slightest slip of the grip and that thing will bob up to the surface again. And some people might be able to get through their lives and manage to die before they really stare this stuff in the eye and deal with it. But that's not really the point. That's just, how can I put it? That's just a side product of, how old they are. It's a coincidence almost, but beyond that, beyond death, these things will not go. They'll come back and they will bite you again and again and again. And in my experience, it'll only get worse until you stand and face it.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And I want to offer a generous bow to what it is I'm asking people to do in my line of work, to turn and face that. I mean, I get it. I've been there, as they say, and I know how challenging it can be to look at what wants to emerge in my life, especially when my intuition is that it may be completely contrary to the path that I'm on. And in fact, I'm in the midst of a transition right now. And for the 5th time in my life, I am in the midst of reading William Bridges' book, Transitions. Have you run across this book yet?
I haven't, no, but I'm always looking for tips.
This is the most elegant book I've ever run across on how people actually make change, what happens. And it's very simple. It's a 3-part process he describes. Phase 1 is something is ending, all right, in whatever arena. This may be vocational, relational, creative, whatever. That's the first phase. The third phase is something has yet to begin or even clarify itself. And the reason I keep reading the book is the middle section. The second section he calls the neutral zone, where you're in between something ending and something beginning. And everybody wants a fix out of this neutral zone because it's so uncomfortable to be in the transition between what was and what needs to become, for you to become, the person you need to be. And it's a stinker to sit in the neutral zone, sometimes with patience on the order of months or even years, and just keep asking what wants to happen here, what's trying to emerge, what do I need to learn, and not go for the fix. The next job, the next relationship, the next house, the next whatever. And it's just so challenging to turn and face this empty place between the two trapeze bars.
Because if you do go for the fix, often as not, then you do, as you say, find yourself back in the same position. We all know people who have the same type of failed relationship over and over again.
Right.
The person who goes from one job to another in the same industry that they're clearly not cut out for and they never were, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Which is why Bridges says that it's just imperative to gently and disciplined, in a disciplined fashion, submit yourself to the neutral zone and just really let it educate you. Beautiful word. It means to draw out. just to really let it educate you about what it wants and what's in there and what kind of transition you need to make. And, you got to love a book called Transitions written by a guy named Bridges.
Yeah. But, thinking again about the black dragon in your dream sounds quite scary, but these things that come up, these emotions, thoughts, feelings, intuitions, whatever combination of these things are coming up within people regarding their lives and whatever aspect or aspects of their lives. This is, a way I characterize it is, it's part of you. It's not a demon from the underworld. It's not there to harm you. It's there to stop you harming yourself, or to help you to help yourself. So, in my opinion anyway, if you can see this as all part of yourself, your own psyche, albeit a hidden aspect that you've denied or suppressed, this is coming up for a good reason. It might feel bad, but if it feels bad, there's a good reason for that, and it's not the fault of this inner part of yourself.
No.
It's because you're out of alignment in some way with other parts of yourself.
Right. I think there's a reason that the word symptom, the etymology of the word symptom, is a sign of what? The origin of the word pathology is the logic of pain. So what's the logic? I totally agree. I don't think we should demonize these parts, even when they're scary. Because in that dream that I had, this dragon that was chasing me was my own creative life. That's how I interpreted that dream. I wasn't doing the creative work that I needed to be doing, and it just showed up as this powerful, primal force in the form of a dragon, a flying dragon, chasing me around. And I'm like a rabbit looking for a hole to duck into. And when I woke up and realized that the dragon was my creative energy, I started to do my real writing, as opposed to what I was doing at that time. I had that dream, which was just kind of academic style writing. And as soon as I started to do that writing, the depression that I had had for 3 or 4 months prior to that dream lifted. And that to me says that there's a correspondence between symptom and sign. And in this case, the symptom came as a nightmare, but I just think it's critical to look at the connection between symptoms. I mean, let's put it this way. This is a psychologist named Arnold Mindell, who started something called process-oriented psychology. And he said to me in one of the interviews I had with him that symptoms are dreams trying to come true. He didn't say maybe. He didn't say sometimes. He said symptoms are dreams trying to come true. Now, that's a hell of a question. If you were to look at some recurring symptom in your body and say, give it a voice, let it fill in the blank, the symptom is now talking to you saying, Greg, my dream is that you would, and fill in the blank.
Yeah, I really enjoy pop culture references in my interviews, I must admit, and they just come up in my mind. It tends to be, I think, because pop culture holds so much, literature, movies, whatever. It holds so much of our collective psyche in there. And two things spring to mind. One is in The Godfather 3, when Michael Corleone is suffering badly from his diabetes or whatever, and there's all this other stuff going on in his life, and Cardinal Lamberto, when he's in the Vatican, says to Michael, the mind suffers, the body cries out. And that's so true, and also in, if you don't mind, I'll offer you another one.
Not at all.
In John Berman's film of Excalibur, which tells the story of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, and Lancelot, at one point he's slept with Guinevere, and this is Arthur's queen. This is all wrong, and he's not living up to the code of honor, as a knight he should be. And he has this terrible dream, this fever dream, where he's being attacked by this vicious knight, and he has a sword run through his side, and suddenly he wakes from the dream, and it's his own sword stuck through his own side. And he's writhing around, and he just goes, I fight against myself. And it's like his torment, his turmoil in his mind has actually manifested itself physically, because he can't go on like this. He knows he's not living how he's supposed to.
Well, those were beautiful. I love those references. And they're spot on, in my opinion. I mean, there's got to be a reason, for instance, that the word passion comes from a word meaning to suffer. Mm-hmm. You know, there's some inherent connection between passion and suffering. And of course, it begs, among other questions, it begs the question, what are you willing to suffer on behalf of? And I think that's an interesting question to pose to oneself is, you know, what am I willing to suffer on behalf of? I think of, here's another pop culture reference, Malcolm Gladwell, you know, the author of Tipping Point mm-hmm. and The Outliers and all that. He calculated this some years ago, got a lot of press at the time, that mastery in any field of endeavor requires a minimum of 10,000 hours of dedicated practice. You know, and that speaks to this idea of what are you willing to suffer on behalf of, to spend thousands of hours. And by the way, the math on this is 90 minutes a day for 20 years. That's what 10,000 hours of dedicated practice means. 90 minutes a day for 20 years or some variation of that. But I think that's important to ask yourself, because passion, in my opinion, is not just exuberance. It's not just excitement, get up and go, vitality, mojo, all that good stuff. I mean, it's that, but it's also endurance. I think that's what Gladwell was getting at. Passion is sticking power. It's staying power. It's, I think, in order to bring creative inspirations to life, in order to bring infatuations into the realm of real love, you've got to stick them at the workbench for a good period of time. 10,000 hours, according to Gladwell. And that's passion too. I mean, that's one of the diagnostic tools I use to show me whether I'm on the right path in terms of my own sense of vitality and aliveness is, am I willing to stick it through for years, step by step by step, in thousands of steps? I mean, I think that's one of the diagnostic tools I use.
Well, two popular expressions spring to mind. One is suffering for your art, and the other is crime of passion. And both of those sound kind of negative, but I think they're related, in all of this, in terms of it being something that's being experienced by a soul who is not completely dumbed down, and cut off from itself.
Yeah, you know, this notion of crimes of passion brings up a good subject. Is not all passions should necessarily be acted upon. I mean, this is again part of the reputation that passion has as an uplifting, exuberant, beneficent kind of force. Not necessarily. You know, I mean, some of the research I ran across in writing the book was that there's a difference between harmonious passion and obsessive passion. And, harmonious is sort of flexible persistence toward your goals and your dreams and your ambitions, and more of a sense of kind of being in a flow state. And obsessive passion is persistence at any cost. And the passion is controlling you rather than the other way around. And your sense of identity, your sense of self-esteem even, is all wrapped up in performing. And, we can see to some degree how when people retire who are of the obsessive passion kind, their mortality rates shoot through the roof when they're denied this kind of addictive relationship to their own life force and their own energies. And I think that's important to ask yourself is, which is which? Am I operating out of a sense of harmonious passion or obsessive, nose to the grindstone, shoulder to the wheel kind of operating in the world?
Well, we talked earlier about the trade-off between safety and security. And the thing that I found kind of, when I say to my cost, I mean, it was to my cost, but then it was to my benefit ultimately, is that I was thought of myself as the type of person who, and there's still part of me that wants to know things to be settled and secure, and I don't think that's uncommon. I think, in fact, we're talking about the vast majority of people are like this. to a greater or lesser extent. But if I look back, and I'm only offering a personal perspective because it's the one I know best, if I look back at my life, there's been nothing but change. And most of what lies ahead of me is to some degree or other uncertain. So it's change and uncertainty. That's been 95% of it, if not more. So it's actually kind of like, okay, I think at this stage you might want to give up, not abandon the idea of safety and stability altogether, but just realize that you're not going to have that 100% of the time, nor would you want it actually.
Now, let me ask you why you say that. Why would you not want it?
Because of what it looks like, because of what we've been talking about at various points here, what it looks like when people achieve it. That if we can say that, well, it's neutral, it means different things for different people. Who wouldn't want safety and stability? But it does have a negative side as well. It depends what you're willing. You're saying what are you willing to do to pursue passion? It's what are you willing to give up to be able to say, well, I know what's going to happen tomorrow and the next day and the day after that and the day after that, and nothing serious can go wrong because I've taken almost any randomness and any chance and any potential for spontaneity out of my life. By doing that, well, what can go wrong? Because nothing's happening, so nothing can go wrong.
Right, yeah. And I guess we would sacrifice a certain amount of spontaneity and excitement and novelty, certainly, if we had everything nailed down. And I ran across this in my research that people who study these sorts of things have found that people who tend to flourish over the years and throughout the course of their life have a tendency to score pretty high in novelty seeking. And that, by definition, is not safety and security. That's continually. I mean, you mentioned Maslow early on. He's the guy who kind of popularized this notion of self-actualization. He said that self-actualizing types are the people who choose, make the growth choice over the fear choice 12 times a day. I mean, that's a bar set pretty high.
Yeah.
But I think this part of this novelty-seeking energy is critical for keeping us on a growing edge, as opposed to just in the safe and secure. And, this is a bit of an acquired taste. I get it. To push yourself out of the box, especially if you grew up in a family that was, say, an alcoholic family where, safety and security are going to be very high priorities for you. And the idea of rocking the boat is not going to be as appealing as it might be for somebody else who likes novelty and discovery and the element of surprise.
But of course, having an element of uncertainty or risk or danger or whatever in your life doesn't mean that your average accountant has to go out and take up skydiving. It might look like that, but as I said earlier, it'll mean different things to different people. And right. for some people, an enormous paradigm shift in their life might just be, well, I was listening to a person on the BBC the other day talking about having a sex change quite late on in their life and their professional career and everything else. And that was something that's very, very personal, but it was just incredible bravery. And it was like, it transformed this person's life beyond all recognition. And they had said, basically, why didn't I do this earlier? This guy who became a girl, it got to about age 55 before doing this. And he said it was like jumping off the Empire State Building, but actually it turned out it was only 6 feet,
Wow. I'll tell you, if I had a buck for every person who ever said I should have done this 5 years earlier, I'd be rich. Mm-hmm. When they finally, after whatever foot dragging, get themselves to act on some call or passion or dream or desire, there's often, very often, that sense of, I should have, maybe could have done this years and years ago. But it really highlights how scary the unknown is. I used to have this old daguerreotype map on the wall in my office that was a picture of the world as it was conceived of during what they call the Age of Discovery, 1600s. And it was one of these old maps, and at the edges of the old maps, the cartographers always used to draw pictures of monsters and dragons and ships with their masts being entwined with tentacles of a giant squid, that kind of thing. But this was their perception of the unknown. What lay beyond terra cognito was fearful, and what lay beyond the light of the campfire was fearful. And so we have a very long history of being afraid of the unknown. And I just again want to encourage people to offer that a gracious bow to the fact that we have a long developmental history of being afraid of the unknown. And it's not just something you're just going to take on willy-nilly. At least that's my sense.
Well, there's immense frustration being hidden and suppressed and suffered by individuals who are not living the way that they really want to be. And you highlight in the book the difference between public and private life that many people have, and this pretending that goes on. But even deeper perhaps than that, I mentioned sexuality, for example. It's a thing that was not so much now, but certainly in the past it was commonly suppressed if it didn't fit in with societal norms or wasn't perceived to. But in terms of maybe career or relationship, lots of other aspects, there are many people who frankly don't know what they want or who they are. And I think there's a process that can be gone through there as well, because everybody has something within them and, aspects of themselves that are perhaps, how many people can say that they're completely 100% realized everything that's within them, that they're not holding anything back whatsoever? Now, a person's highest goal and highest good may be to become the best goddamn accountant in the world. Sure. I'm not ragging on accountants because I employ one. I'm only mentioning this because I wouldn't want to be an accountant. That's not that's not me. But you see what I mean? So whatever it happens to be, I think there's a greatest that an individual can be lurking within all of us.
Absolutely. I think it's the challenge is turning the receiver on sometimes and being willing to hear what you hear when you turn it on, which I think explains a lot of why people, it's like they're clamping their hands over their ears and they're dancing madly backwards to try to just block out their marching orders. And I think it takes a certain amount of courage, definitely takes a certain amount of courage to turn that receiver on and start hearing what's coming out of, inside you, whether it's paying attention to your dreams or your intuitions or even the songs you absent-mindedly hum in the car. What section of the bookstore you always walk into first when you walk into a bookstore, what your body symptoms are trying to tell you. There's 100 channels through which whatever's on the inside tries to get out and be known and expressed and witnessed. But being willing to hear what's in there is not always so easy for people, especially when they have that intuition that it's going to rock the boat, whatever it is. But this is another reason why I'm a big believer in starting small. You don't have to just tip the whole apple cart over. You don't have to, you mentioned jumping out of an airplane. Start small and look at the feedback your life gives you. Take little steps and ask yourself, well, how did that feel? Do I feel better or worse? Do I feel more expansive or more contracted? It's just kind of a call and response relationship to your own life where somebody asks you, so Greg, how you doing today? Tell them how you really are for a change and then see how that felt, or take your jokes to open mic night and then come back in the evening and kind of assess how that felt, or even just rearrange one piece of furniture in your house and reflect on how that felt. Just little ways of pushing the envelope a little bit and then looking at the feedback. I think that's really one of the best ways of discerning what's what and how you're feeling and how you should proceed.
Yeah, I like that little section you have in the book where it's like, maybe order something different at the restaurant or, have a different coffee from the one you would normally have. If that's the level you're at, just dip your toe and see how it feels. And you know what? I've actually met it's not surprising to meet someone who's autistic or someone who has Tourette's as such, but I'm using these conditions, we call them, as an example, that to be yourself doesn't mean that that you're going to go round upsetting and offending people left, right and centre. But sometimes if you are being your authentic self in the long run, it's actually less trouble than being buttoned down and pretending to be somebody you're not, because you're not going to bring everybody with you. But right. It's not a popularity contest, you know. Most people I know don't have hundreds of friends because, well, A, it's too many to keep up with, but it's not about quantity, you know, it's about quality, and I think you can apply that to lots of aspects in life. So being yourself, you're not going to bring everybody with you, but unless you're a career politician, you don't worry about that.
Right. Yeah, I had a friend of mine say once to me years ago, he said, Greg, you know, you should just think of it this way. A very small number of people are going to dislike you. A very small number of people are going to really love you. The vast majority are not going to care one way or another. And to be attached to what other people think of you is probably a terrific waste of time.
Oh, I think it's fatal. I mean, if not literally, then certainly in terms of your heart and your passion. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. By the way, you know, one more thing I want to share about the small steps approach. I'm generally a proponent of that way of making change. I remember who was it? Who wrote Ragtime? E.L. Doctorow. A novelist named E.L. Doctorow once said it's like driving home at night. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole journey that way. So I'm a big believer in the small steps approach, unless the prospect of some turmoil in your life is preferable to the kind of psychological death you're experiencing by staying put in whatever the status quo is. In which case, I say let her rip. You know what I'm saying? It's like, yeah, the small steps approach is great unless you are just absolutely dying on the vine and you need to take a flyer. Under those circumstances, I encourage people to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go down a dark route here or anything, but I've known people, well, I've certainly read about people who have committed suicide, and it appears that when their mind could take no more, they probably needed to do something along the lines of what you've just described. But the action they instead took was just to pull the plug and say no more. They got to the point where it was intolerable, but they couldn't quite take that last step and kind of stay in this world. It was kind of, you know, if you see what I mean, they found themselves, people have all sorts of reasons why they do all sorts of drastic things, but I've certainly read of cases and talked to people who've known people who appear to have reached that sort of impasse in their life. And if they had lived maybe another 24 hours, maybe they could have made it through the door into the light, and who knows. But I think what it does is emphasize how the different range that this experience will take for certain people. For some people, it's just a case of, I just need to get a different job that isn't in a bank. For other people, it is like, I am at the end of my tether. Something has to change, you know?
Yeah. I remember when I was in college, I read Albert Camus' book, The Rebel. And I remember that his description of what a rebel was really startling to me. This is not necessarily somebody who's out on the ramparts or somebody who's part of a resistance movement. A rebel is anybody who says no to some condition of life that's intolerable and unacceptable to them. And they stop their foot on the ground and they say no to it, but the no is really a yes to their own integrity and their own life. And I was just really struck by that. And I know that there have been times in my own life when in a sense, my life depends on me saying no to something that is toxic to me, or draining the life out of me, like a job or relationships where I feel like a ghost of my full self, or life goals that I don't really have any passion for. And there's something about saying that no, which I suppose at the far extremes would be like the example you used about suicide, but short of that is is saying no to a condition that you find unacceptable. And it's ultimately an affirmative kind of a no.
Yeah, it's the power of no. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, right. It's a bit of a contradiction in terms, but a no can very much be a yes. Yeah. And frankly, a yes can be a no. You know, you're constantly saying yes to all the projects. It is a way of distracting yourself from some deeper feeling, perhaps, that you are not suited to this line of work, period. Why continue to take on more projects in this line of work? You know, sometimes a yes can be ultimately a negative.
Just thinking about one of the popular objections that I've heard and I read about when discussing some of the subjects that we have, and that is, oh, it's too late for me now, sort of thing. And again, referring to the Joseph Chilton Pearce interview that I did, he's a good example of someone who the second half of his life has not been about a gradual decline. It might be physically, but that's hardly surprising in some ways. But we don't have to plateau in life and then just wait for here we go. It's down. It doesn't have to be about contraction and stagnation. It can be not only growth, and I'm being a little bit arbitrary with the second half of life, but you know, the midlife crisis is it's a popular cliche. You can accelerate your growth. And we used to see this, and maybe still do, in some indigenous societies where healthy individuals can go on acquiring wisdom and acquiring skills, and they reach the point where they may be physically weak and on their deathbed, but they've never been wiser or more revered than they were in that moment. And I think a lot of us get to a point in our lives where we accept the lot we're given, however unhappy we are, purely because of whereabouts in our life cycle we think we are. We said, oh, well, maybe if I was 20, I would do it differently. But now I'm 50 and it's, well, you know, I hear about a lot of that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's tragic. And I understand. I mean, there's the energy just may not be there. I mean, just the law of entropy being what it is. The energy may just simply not be in the batteries to the same degree it was when we were younger, after 50 or 60 years old. But I'll tell you, this Vital Signs book has brought me into the company of more and more people who are what they call third agers. Have you heard this term?
Yes.
The third age. So this effectively what in this country we would have called a retirement age and up. But it's like the last third, so 60 to 90 or so. And this is a movement now. I believe it actually started more in your neck of the woods than mine. But it's essentially a movement that says, stay engaged as long as you possibly can. People don't want or even can afford to retire in the traditional sense anymore. So they're looking for the next thing, the next way to contribute. And more, this third age is characterized by, it's got to have a sense of purpose. You know, it's got to have not just financial remuneration, not even primarily, but it has to have a sense of meaning and purpose and contribution. And more people are looking for that. And I mean, this is one of the strangest things about this book. I don't quite get this, is ever since it came out a year ago, it's been on the Amazon top 100 books in the category of aging. Now, I didn't write this book for that demographic, but for some reason for a year, it's been on that list. So it says that there's a hunger among these third agers for vitality in that phase of life. And I'm not suggesting, like, what was it, Dylan Thomas talked about rage against the dying of the light. You know, I'm not necessarily saying you need to rage, but there is so much life and generativity and contribution to be made, but it requires a willingness to continue to say yes to life instead of, okay, it's now, like you said, I've reached 50 or 60, now it's the long, slow decline. In fact, I ran across a book on Amazon recently called Live Long, Die Short. Which I love, because the idea is that you can live right till the end and then it's a sharp drop off, die short, rather than this, get to midlife and this slow, pathetic decline. I definitely don't think that is a required developmental task.
Yeah, no, I remember that it just popped into my head again, a personal experience, my grandfather dying, and he lived to a ripe old age, and he had some physical challenges, but he was, I think he was planning to go and play golf, and he just bought a new car, and he'd got up on this particular morning, and he was making his breakfast in the kitchen, and he just dropped on the floor. Just that was gone, and I firmly believe, knowing what I did about his life, that a lot of the way that he lived, and ate and drank actually, that it made him happy. And he never stopped moving, I remember the doctor said to him when he had problems with his knees, this is a physical thing now, but it's a good metaphor for what you're describing. He said, well, if you stop walking, your knees won't get better. So just keep moving,
Right. Yeah, actually, I think that's a beautiful example. Somehow, even if you literally can't physically move, there's lots of ways of creating momentum in life and movement. You can share your ideas, you can share your art, you can share yourself in whatever way. I just think it's important to just continue to do that and not to just give up the ghost.
Well, I've got 3 thoughts here that I'm just going to throw at you, and you can pick up one of them or none of them or all of them, whatever. But there's a line in your book. I'm not sure if it's your line or it's a quote from one of your interviewees, and that's, why is it better to last than to burn? And this is not better to burn out and fade away, as in, live fast, die young, leave a beautiful corpse. We're not talking about glorious rock star deaths here. We're talking about things in our lives, whether it's a project, a career, a relationship, that, again, as I said earlier, it's about quality, not quantity, so not everything has to be forever. It's as simple as that. And, friends, relationships, I like to think they're here for a reason or a season or for life. And it's not going to be all of those. The other thought is failures are opportunities to succeed, in the sense that, okay, that didn't work. And sometimes people will fail and then they stop trying. And yes, you have to be aware that you're not banging your head against the same wall each time. But, in failure, for me, there's a seed of success. And the third thought is that, a bit of a cliche now, but I've always liked it, the journey is the destination. Many people are working towards something that they'll never see. Whether, usually it's retirement. Oh, well, I'll get there and then we'll have this and then tomorrow we'll do that. And when I've saved enough money, you know the cliches around that.
Sure. Yeah. I remember when I was younger, probably my 20s or so, starting out in my vocational life, I had a conversation with my dad, who is at heart a scientist. And he said, you'll probably be better off generally in life if you quit focusing on failure and success and pitching back and forth between happy and sad, depending on which one of those you have in your pocket. He said, you're probably better off, just think like a scientist. Life is an experiment and there's just results. Mm-hmm. And I love that. I love that because it takes some of the onus off the attachment to failure and success. And then years later, I ran across, I think it was Isaac Asimov. It might have been Ray Bradbury, but I think it was Asimov who said that the great statement in science, the one that kind of heralds new discoveries, is not eureka. It's, that's funny. And I just love that because it just shows a beginner's mind that's still on active duty. It just shows how important curiosity is to the affair. But my dad's comment was just, think like a scientist. It's just results. And then I remember when I was preparing to quit employment for self-employment, leave the newspaper world to be a freelance writer, I had lunch with one of my mentors and I was lamenting my absolute stark raving terror about failing at the enterprise. And he said, Greg, if you are not failing regularly, you're living so far below your potential that you're failing anyway.
Yeah.
Which is another bar set very high. But, and I entered a profession, freelancing, which has, the kind of rejection and failure you experience as a freelance writer would stun a panhandler. But it's great practice for continually sticking my neck out and just getting used to the prospect of, quote, failure. And what I learned from getting so many rejection letters, and I got thousands of them, literally, over the years is that failure and rejection was not the form letter that I would get from an editor telling me that this does not meet our editorial needs or whatever. As bad as it ever got was an editor who said, "We cannot use the paper you sent us. You wrote on it." I mean, it just showed me that the failure and rejection was more the conversation I had with myself after I got the rejection letter, and the way I beat myself up and call myself an idiot, and that was stupid to send it to that person, and you're never going to succeed. That to me was a lot more failure and rejection than anything I got from the editors.
Exactly. Well, Greg, as we begin to bring things to a close for today, I just want to get your thoughts on gratitude, because this is something that I've learned to, and I'm still learning actually, to express on a daily basis, whether even if it's just internally. Recently, there's been so much death and mayhem on the news, and I don't focus too much on that, but because I do commentary on politics and world affairs, I sort of tune in maybe once a day just to see what the latest big events are. And bottom line is, when I hear, whether it's an accident, terrorist attack, an individual murder, whatever it happens to be, or even just the story of some people who are living, by comparison to you and I, in absolute destitution, I just say to myself, grace of God. And I'm not religious, but what I'm saying to myself is, you're not them, God help them. Yeah. Look at how lucky you are. You live, comparatively speaking, you live in paradise. So right. You make the best of it. And if you even think about moaning about something, then get a grip of yourself, because you're very, very lucky.
Boy, I couldn't agree more. I'm having the same response to the news these days. And I was extremely emboldened around this issue years ago when I ran across an interview with the Dalai Lama, of all people, said it's okay to compare yourself positively with other people. And which I thought was, for some reason or another, scandalous coming from somebody like that, but it was enormously liberating, and it's pretty much just a recap of what you said. It's to remember that I'm my gratitudes, just to remember to be grateful and whatever, counting my blessings as it were. And I think that's the better part of valor, even when it comes to living a life that just feels alive to you, is to remember the good things. I've taken to doing this ever since I turned 60 a couple of months ago. I now, before every single meal, I say at least 2 little things that I'm grateful for. From that morning or that afternoon. And it's amazing how readily I can come up with things. And I just find it's a very useful practice to keep myself balanced, is to remember those gratitudes.
Final thought, Greg, end it on an English note. The group, once again, pop culture, the group Pink Floyd have got a song called Tame. And if people don't know it, go and listen to it. But more importantly, read the lyrics, because it comes back to me again and again and again, a song that I first listened to when I was a teenager. And it's about how time slips by, how it escapes us. And in the song, there's this lovely expression it's about the English, but it applies to all the people that you and I and all the people we've been talking about. Quiet desperation. That yearning of, like, I can't take this anymore, but you don't say anything. And as I said earlier, it's never too late. Don't wait. Don't suffer from what you call in the book the pain of wasted possibilities. If there's somebody you want to say that you love them, there's something you want to do, don't wait, because if you do, someday, that's it. Right. Beautifully put. Okay, well, thank you, Greg. Today we've been talking about your book, Vital Signs, The Nature and Nurture of Passion. Tell folks the best way to get that. I mean, actually, it's widely available everywhere. But maybe you can share details of your website. And, of course, you're going to be in London in the very near future giving a talk. And I think that's going to take some sort of workshop form as well. And just tell folks about it anyway. Yeah, sure. I'm going to be actually just doing a lecture. It's not workshop. There's some Q&A, but it's a lecture through alternatives, which is at St. John's Church in Piccadilly. And it's the 23rd of January. I believe it's a Monday evening, and open to the public. And as for getting a hold of me and finding out about my work, it's gregglevoy.com. GreggLevoy.com is pretty much world headquarters for me these days. Splendid. Well, Gregg, thank you so much for joining us today on legalizefreedom.com.
Great. Thanks so much.
Well, folks, that's it for another week. As ever, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, check out the website, which is legalizefreedom.com. That's legalize-freedom.com, where you'll find an archive of programs offering alternative views on a wide range of topics, including politics and economics, energy and environment, culture, spirituality, history, and the nature of reality. You can also browse and buy a range of publications from our guests, and if you're feeling generous, make a donation to help keep the site up and running. Whether you listen, donate, or do both, I greatly appreciate your support. Until next time, I'm Greg Moffat, and you've been listening to legalizefreedom.com.